Former British Ambassador to Warsaw Charles Crawford, my guest, Polish why not. Good evening, Mr. Ambassador.
Dobry wieczór. I'm trying to remember some words, but I don't remember very many.
O, dobry wieczór, no przepięknie, jestem pod wrażeniem. No właśnie, bo pan zna język polski.
Nie pamiętam, this is the problem. I can remember a few things. I can understand you okay, more or less. Mniej więcej, ale it's difficult to talk intelligently in Polish.
But how did you get to Poland? And when? Many years ago.
It was a long time ago now, nearly 20 years. My first job in the Foreign Office was in Yugoslavia, when it was still Yugoslavia, just after Tito died in 1981. So my first language I learned, official professional language, was Serbo-Croat, tak zwany Serbo-Croat, as it then was. And then Yugoslavia broke up, and they had the wars and all the rest of it. And after Yugoslavia, I ended up dealing with the Russians, with Moscow for 5 years, 2 years in London, when communism ended, when Yeltsin took over from Gorbachev. And then I was in Moscow for 3 years. So I had some Russian as well as some Serbian, quite a lot of Serbian and some Russian. Then I went back to Yugoslavia as ambassador to Sarajevo in the new country, and then Belgrade after Milosevic. So I spent 8 years altogether in Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia. And then they said, would you like to go to Poland as ambassador? And that was the next big Slav posting. And the last one, of course, is Moscow. And then, you sort of work your way up to Moscow because that's just the biggest country and the most senior job. So I said, okay, I'll have a go for Polish. And I went to Poland in late 2003, I think, just to physically visit Poland. I'd never been there before. And then I started as ambassador in late 2003, that's right.
So you know very well, jacy my jesteśmy. How do you think?
I have seen Polish, textbooks for teaching people Polish that give this as one of the first words you should learn in Polish, because it's a regular verb. I mean, narzekam, narzekasz, narzeka. It's regular. It's just a very strange word to choose. In Latin, you typically learn amo, amas, amat. I love, you love, he loves, amo, amamas, amatis, amat. We love, you love, they love. But in Polish, they seem to think it's a good thing for you to learn narzeka, narzekam, narzekasz, narzeka. And that's just, for me, a bit strange. There is a thing called proud Polish pessimism. And it sort of comes up a lot. Poles are incredibly proud of their history, and no one in the UK knows about Polish history, because Poland 400 or 500 years ago was pretty much Europe. It was an extraordinary, huge thing. And then it disappeared, and then it came back, and then it had communism, and, so there's a lot of drama there. But there's almost too much drama. And there's a sort of slight sense with Poles, I think, and a lot of Polish people agree with me. They say, yes, well, we are a bit pessimistic. We tend to narzekać a bit too much, even when things are going really well. And so for British people, I don't know about Americans, but British people, it's quite hard to, if you like, be honest with Poles. If you say, well, this isn't very good, they'll really complain that you don't understand them. And if you say it's very good, they'll say, well, you don't understand it because it's not as good as it seems. So it just gets complicated. It's a bit complicated.
What about our English? How we spell? What is our accent? Which mistake we do the most often?
Polish is a very phonetic language. When you know how the letters are pronounced, you pronounce them like that. That's clear. And so even long words are clearly pronounced, pretty much in the same way by all Poles, as far as I can see. It's phonetic, whereas English isn't. The grammar is a lot easier, but the pronunciation must be harder for you. So one of the things I think this is a Slavic thing, not just a Polish thing, but it's clearly a Polish thing, is that the letter I, as in, I don't know, Kaczynski, the letter I at the end of that name, or PS, a dog, PS. that E is very clearly E. Whereas in English, it looks the same, but it's typically pronounced like your Y. That sounds like a foreigner speaking English. It doesn't sound like the Russian mafia speaking English. This is the difference. Mr. Bond. They always say Mr. Bond, not Mr. Bond. Mr. Bond. These cannot be excluded. These. It's not these, it's this. So if you think about a lot of these words with a little Y in them, in the Polish Y, you'll start to get it right. But of course, it's not always like that, because we have like to ski, which is to go on skis on the snow, and that is where the I is like your E. But mainly in English, the Y the I is pronounced like a Y.
Okay, you are really specialist in pronunciation, in English grammar too, but for us it's really funny that we have to learn how to not to be too precise, too clear in pronunciation. For example, the word Wimbledon, even sometimes without B. Wimbledon, not Wimbledon, 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 Wimbledon.
Not Wimbledon, that would be bad. So I would say Wimbledon, but I could also say Wimbledon, and everyone would know what I meant, and no one would care. You know, it's sort of, English pronunciation is, you know, there's lots of accents, it's quite dynamic. There's class issues, if you like, you know, upper class people and more working class people will pronounce words differently. So there's a lot going on in pronunciation. But one of the things which is very, very easy to spot is how you pronounce the S at the end of a word. So, for example, I have one cat, would say Polish, dwa kota?
Dwa koty.
Dwa koty. You see? Dwa koty, pięć kotów, right? I mean, anyway, in English, one cat, two cats, 5 cats, 1,000,000 cats, 66 cats. It's just cats. But that is after a T, k, a, t, s. If I say one I, it's not one ice, it's one eyes. It's pronounced with a Z. So I'm looking at you, you know, you have, in your room, you have clothes. You have a nose, 2 noses. You have 2 ears. You have on the shelf there, you've got vases. So the Z is very clear in English. Foreigners, I think, do make that mistake.
There are only some exceptions.
Yeah, because you can't say cats, which sounds strange. So like book, any word ending in k, book, I can see your books. I'm not seeing your books. I can see your, what else can I see there? Lights with a T, S. And the English sound f, coughs. If I cough, I coughs. But everything else is pronounced with a Z at the end. It's written with an S, but pronounced with a Z, and that's very confusing.
Okay, so what about your Polish? How did you learn Polish?
When I was in Poland, I tried to learn this little expression, which I thought was relevant to the whole situation. And it's this. Brytyjczyk mówiąc po polsku jest jak pies chodzący na tylnych łapach. Nic dziwnego, że chodzi źle, dziwne, że w ogóle próbuje. What's that Polish tongue twister about the beetle and dziwne ziu?
W Szczebrzeszynie chrząszcz brzmi w trzcinie.
Exactly, okay. Well, no one's going to talk about that. That's just impossible. But I made up my own one, which is książę i księżniczka wciąż czytają książki na księżycu. Which doesn't make any sense, but it's just bloody hard to say for English people. And there's a lot of grammar going on there as well. This is the point. I came to Warsaw and they gave me lessons. I had lessons with a Polish woman who came along and tried to explain things to me. And I think she was surprised that I could make such good guesses. Because once you know one Slav language, you can start making guesses about what words mean in, like pies, dog in Polish, but it's pas in in Serbian. So once but then cat is, what's cat in Polish? Kotka?
Kot, kotka, jako ona to jest kotka.
What's a cat in Polish?
Cat to jest kot, ten kot.
I think in Serbian it's mačka, so it's a completely different word. So some words are the same, but nonetheless you can start to guess the patterns of the language are the same. But I never got to the point where I could really talk like this in Polish. It was just too much. But I could pretty much understand you, and I remember when I left, I was meeting the foreign minister and the prime minister then, and they would talk in Polish, and I would have an interpreter to help me talk back in. The interpreter would talk in Polish, but I could understand the prime minister without being translated. So it was pretty good. I can read the newspapers, I can sort of do stuff, but I couldn't really ever speak it, not terribly well.
Okay, but tell me one thing more. What about secrets of diplomacy? Your speeches to VIPs and your favorite anecdotes, even with the Queen. You had that.
I think I went with President Kwasniewski just after I became ambassador. I went with President Kwasniewski on the state visit to London. And that's a state visit is different from an official visit, because then the state visit is the highest visit between two countries. And so President Kwasniewski was the personal guest of the Queen. So the President Kwasniewski stays at Buckingham Palace. And I remember talking to people at the palace about the visit. And they said, look, for you diplomats, this is all about politics and Poland joining the EU, and it's about this big picture, European architecture. He said, for the Queen, it's house guests. Are these people, how are they going to behave? Are they going to go out clubbing all night and come back at 5 o'clock in the morning, like some other state visitors have done? She wants to know what's going on in her house. And of course, President Kwasniewski and his wife were lovely and everything was fine. But you see the world from a different point of view when you're in Buckingham Palace, I must say. Before you went on your new posting as an ambassador, you would go to Buckingham Palace with your spouse or partner, whoever it was, and meet the Queen within a little group of ambassadors. And she would just, you're her ambassador. This is the point. You're not the Prime Minister's ambassador. You're her personal messenger.
Don't they change diplomats like in Poland?
No, in Poland, I know. The new government's come in. 50 ambassadors have lost their jobs. The 50 ambassadors who've been appointed by the previous government have been told to go away. I know one of them. It's a bit of a blow. No, in England, all that will just carry on. Nothing will change. There might be one or two jobs where someone like Washington is a very sensitive one, maybe Brussels too, the EU and Brussels, where the new government wants someone it just knows, not someone who's on their side, but just someone it knows. But I'd be very surprised if either of those positions change very quickly. No, so basically everything just carries on as before. This I think is a big difference between our country and your country. You don't really change officials in that way. If you remember, when I first went there was Prime Minister Miller, who just had a helicopter accident, and then he stepped down, and we had, Belka, and then you had the election, and then you had Marcinkiewicz, and then you had Kaczynski, and I think there was something like 11 finance ministers when I was there in 4 years, which is too many, to be honest. That's not reasonable. So it was a little bit frustrating from that point of view, because what you like as a diplomat is to help your ministers have relationships with Polish ministers. That's your job. But if I say to my finance minister, there's a new Polish foreign minister, you'll say, fine, there'll be another one in 3 months' time. Why should I care? And that was sort of and that was that particular period. That was just how it was. So, but yes, I enjoyed it. Yeah, sure.
And what about writing speeches to famous people?
Well, speeches.
Speeches.
Thank you. People in the ministry who spoke fantastic English, but they couldn't write a speech. It's a different thing. And most British people can't write a speech, because a speech is to be done well. It's quite, it's a job. What I think about it is the hardest thing is not the words. The hardest thing is finding something interesting to say. So, for example, just say you've got to make a speech about Europe and Russia and Ukraine. Mm-hmm. You might say, listen, I'm going to organise my speech around 3 questions. Are we winning? Are we losing? How do we tell? And all of a sudden everyone says, oh, that's pretty clever. And you just have the most simple questions, and then you organise the speech around that. But if you start off by saying, let me tell you something about the history of Russia and Poland and, Poland and Ukraine. No, you've got to have an interesting idea. And I think once you do that, speeches come to life and people enjoy them. And people enjoy giving them, this is the point. So what you want is for the speaker and the audience to have a conversation. And the conversation is with the speaker is speaking, but the audience are nodding and smiling and clapping, or, they're actually together in that place. And they're enjoying each other's company, but they're enjoying the moment. And that's the tricky thing. Now, Polish public speaking tends to be very formal. I'll finish with this story. When President Kwasniewski was president, you had the wonderful Chopin competition in Warsaw.
Yeah.
I think you have it every 5 years for pianists. Yeah. And, it's great. Anyway, we went along to the final night of the gala concert where all the winners play. And there was like 40 minutes of speeches at the start. The deputy minister made a speech and introduced the deputy mayor, and the deputy mayor introduced the mayor, and then someone introduced the culture minister, and the culture minister introduced someone else, and finally it got to President Kwasniewski, who gave quite a good speech. But in England, after the first 2 or 3 minutes of this, people in the audience would be shouting, saying, give us the piano players, stop the speeches. And people in Poland seem to love to listen to this stuff. And all the
Are you sure? Are you sure
well,
people laugh?
But they don't protest. They don't walk out. They don't throw anything. So they would throw things in England. But the funny thing is, none of them had anything to say. They all repeated each other. So the whole exercise was weird and pointless. Talking about the Queen, really, this is something I don't think we understand in England, but a lot of our cultural instincts come from, I think, the royal family. And what the royal family like is things to be very short. Short speeches, short dinners. When the Queen went to Moscow, she wanted to see the shortest ballet. That was fine. A bit of ballet's nice, but just not 3 hours, that's fine. An hour will be fine. And so keeping everything short and not too boring. It's a very big thing for us, and I think that's a difference between us and you. You seem to be able to accept levels of tedious public speaking, which are just insane as far as we're concerned.
Okay. But by the way, the Queen had very good jokes.
Well, she had very queenly jokes. She had the jokes which, she's the Queen, so if she makes any sort of joke, people will laugh. But it was all very measured. I tried to write 1 or 2 speeches for the Queen when I was a diplomat, and it was very hard to get the tone of it right, because she had a very specific tone, because she was the only person in the world who was the Queen. There's plenty of prime ministers, but there's only one Queen. And so it had to be very much her voice, and something which wasn't at all political, but nonetheless had a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of humour and a little bit of generosity. So that was actually really hard. And I think the people in her office, and no doubt in the King's office now, they're very good at that. Whereas if you don't do it, because they do it every day, if you only do it once every 2 years or something as a diplomat, you can't, I'm good at this, but even I found that very difficult.
But do you mean that there wasn't her jokes?
I don't know. It depends on the joke. But I think she would have a speech written. But then what she would do is she would sit down with her people and go through it. She was a very professional person. This was a job, and she would sit down and say, I don't like that bit much. Can you, she would work on the speech. She certainly wouldn't accept it. So in that sense, it may have been, they weren't exactly jokes, but they were humorous things she said, which were amusing and subtle. And some of them may have come up through the drafting process, but she would have decided how to give them and where to give them and the sort of weight to put on them. because in the end it was her speeches, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And as a diplomat, you see it from a very strange place. You're not really living in the country. You physically sleep in the country, but you're living in a little sort of bubble of diplomatic relations. And so you meet lots of people, but you don't really get to know them terribly well. This is the thing. It's quite hard, I think, for the typical Polish person. They don't quite know what an ambassador is, but it sounds very important. And so they're a little bit nervous about, talking to you. And you know what it's like in Poland. You have pan and pani and all this stuff. Well, there were this one couple I knew, senior business couple. And we went on holiday with them. We went to Rome for the weekend, just the four of us, But he always referred to me as Mr. Ambassador. He just couldn't say Charles, just couldn't physically say it.
Yes, for instance, for me, it's really surprising that in English we write I in big letter, but you in small letter. Why I?
I don't know. That's a good question. It would look a bit strange with a little dot. I suppose that's why. I don't know.
Oh, thank you.
Good point. I've never thought about it. And these things are very deep. The way language deals with hierarchy and with, with gender and with status. I think Polish this is one of the hardest things. I think państwo is such a strange word because if you look at the grammar of państwo, it can be a pronoun, it could be a noun. It means a plural thing, but it takes a singular form. Państwo.
Pan, pani, państwo. Tak, a to państwo to jest tak country too.
But with the grammar of państwo, it's very, very... It's a neuter noun referring to men and women for a start. So just trying to put your head around that in English. For you, you don't think about it. Just like I don't think about you with a small y. But I think the one thing that really surprised me, because I hadn't seen it before in Poland, was this thing of calling someone like Pani Marta, for example. And I would say, oh, why is, hello, Pani Marta, or Pan Kaczynski, or whatever it is, as a form of you. That, in English, just sounds very strange. It sounds... Do you know the expression passive-aggressive?
Passive-aggressive.
Passive-aggressive is a phrase that means you're being aggressive, but you're pretending not to be.
Okay.
So if I said in English, to you, why are you asking that question? That's okay. But if I said, why is Madame Kielczyk asking me this question, talking to you, that would sound very, very strange. In English, it would just sound weird. It would sound as if I'm trying to insult you in some way. But what it means is I'm putting distance between myself and you by calling you in the third person form.
Charles, it's okay, yes?
It's essential. You can call me Peter if you want, but don't call me Mr. Ambassador. That is too much.
Okay.
First of all, because I'm not an ambassador. In English, in England, you don't keep the title of ambassador. You do if you're a general and you do if you're a bishop, but you don't if you're an ambassador. So this is just a disaster.
But in Poland, we have it.
In Poland, you do. Yeah, once you're an ambassador, you are an ambassador forever. So people say, oh, well, Mr. Ambassador, I can't be bothered to explain it, but I'm not an ambassador. So you have either Mr. Crawford or you have Charles. That's it.
Okay. So thank you very much, Charles, for this interview.
Charles,
of course. Not of course.
Of course, that's it. With
Yes. Yes. Thank you for this lesson too. Really important. Thank you so much.
Dziękuję. Okay, do widzenia.
Dziękuję, do widzenia.